Hasn't it been an interesting couple of months that we have found ourselves in? An interesting couple of weeks as well, right? If you're in the United Kingdom, you've seen something that hasn't been done for 70 years. The peaceful change of power. But something that's probably haven't been done for generations before that. Because in the same week we also had the peaceful transfer of political power. And, of course, we had the death of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. We've got a war in Ukraine that's drastically going out of control. And we have someone who's trying to entrench, but what can you do? You're listening to Around the World Today, Series 5, Episode 4, with me, Terry D. And welcome.
Welcome, everybody, to this week's episode. We really appreciate you joining us. This podcast really shows us how we can all learn, live, and thrive off of each other. By sharing our knowledge through our conversations, we will impart some knowledge whilst learning ourselves how to progress even further. Here is your host.
Hello and welcome to Around the World Today, Series 5, Episode 4, with me, Terry D. And we have had an interesting break. There's been times when I haven't wanted to look at media. There's been times when I have just found myself in despair over the last couple of months, because basically the world is going even more crazier than normal. Haven't it always? It's an interesting time, as I said in the intro, to find yourself in this unknown, uncharted what's going on. There's always been a constant. If you were a British or Commonwealth or even a Australian, Canadian, Caribbean in some areas, citizen. Because Her Majesty the Queen was your Queen. We have left an era in its own right. We have now entered a new era, a new monarch on the throne. Something that hasn't been done for 7 decades. So everything is a bit slow right now, because I very much get, for someone who enjoys strategy, that people knew what was going. And I've always said it, even before Her Majesty passed away, that there were people probably planning for this, like what to do when this happens. But I don't think they took into account that when Her Majesty would swear in a new government 2 days before her death, that one, I think, you really couldn't plan for, could you, even if you tried to plan for this. But how about we look at some of those things that Queen Elizabeth had done, and their differences to someone who is an autocracy leader, such as Vladimir Putin. To me, Queen Elizabeth II had many powers that were hers, and hers alone to use for many institutions. She had the historical thing of all military that served under the crown swore an oath of allegiance to her, what made her the most powerful military leader in the world. Although in practice, the leadership of the military was delegated to her parliaments and her governments around the world. But in theory, she was the commander-in-chief of all of these forces. She was the font of all orders, of all commands and regulations, just like she was the font of all law, and the justice system, and Parliament, she gave and divulged her authority away. If you watch the accession of the previous Prince of Wales to become, as he is now known in his own right, King Charles III, by the grace of God. Again, in here, King Charles swore to uphold the current system, to divulge most of his power to an elected parliament, not only here in the United Kingdom, but elsewhere, to also the devolved parliaments. It was interesting this time, wasn't it? Because 70 years ago there wasn't devolution in the United Kingdom. This time the king went to each devolved parliament, except Northern Ireland because they were not sitting, but went to each constituent country of the United Kingdom, to their devolved administrations, as well as the UK government. I believe that in time he would go and visit the other heads and other countries. There's a time that we don't actually know, because many of us were either too young to know how this works out, or just weren't even born the last time we had a change in monarch. In those 70 years, the Queen tirelessly fought for the Commonwealth, her family of nations, not hers, but all of ours. A family of nations that believed in peace and unity among the family. Family of nations that I have talked about the Commonwealth before, and I feel that we as British people have turned our back on there, where our monarch had not. We, as the supposed grown-ups there, were meant to help the other nations, the younger nations, who used to be part of our empire, flourish as independent nations. If they wanted to keep the crown, Her Majesty allowed them to keep her as, monarch. If they wanted to get rid of her or remove her and become a republic, but still stay in the Commonwealth, still stay in the family, that was allowed. It draws me to a prayer at a service that I went to on Tuesday for an organisation called Peace Mala that believes in uniting all faith and communities in peace. Yes, and it was they were celebrating the United Nations International Day of Peace and Peace Mala's 20th year in existence. This is an organisation that was founded in Swansea by a retired religious studies teacher, actually, I believe, and she has been given an MBE by Her Majesty the Queen for services to this. There's a prayer by St. Francis of Assisi. I'm going to read it. If you wish to join in, take that moment of quietness and stillness before I read, and let's all meditate on the words and reflect on what this prayer is. But let's take that moment. Lord, make me an instrument of your peace. Where there is hatred, let me sow love. Where there is injury, pardon. Where there is doubt, faith. Where there is darkness, light. And where there is sadness, joy. O Divine Master, grant that I may, not so much seek to be consoled as to console, to be understood as to understand, to be loved as to love. For it is in giving that we receive. It is in pardoning that we are pardoned. And it is in dying that we are born into eternal life. Amen. Isn't that, for me, you probably could tell in my voice, it is such an uplifting prayer, because it is true. When we come together, when we drop hatred and we show love, when we stop trying to injure people and we pardoned for any injuries which caused to people, be it mental or physical, when we leave that darkness and there is light, when there is sadness, we try and bring joy. You know, these, sometimes, if you look at it, St. Francis's prayer is how Queen Elizabeth tried to live her life as a human being. Now, the institution of monarchy is different to that of Queen Elizabeth. Sometimes I believe that we are too hepped up on those labels to forget that the person who wears the crown may have different opinions to the crown on top of their head. Remember, as I've said, in the session, she handed over a vast majority of her power to her politically elected parliaments, chosen for by the people. In Russia, where their president rules like a totalitarian dictator, because his constitution allowed him to do this. If you look at Russian politics going back until the Tsars, the person who has been leading the Russian state as president has most of the same power than the Tsar did. And how did that end up? The Tsars had to have a secret police. They had to live behind barbed wire. They were not seen by their people. They could not go for a walk around as the king did the day after his mum died. They could not walk in front of a coffin in a busy street in their own state. This still can't happen for Vladimir Putin. Now, our neighbour in the UK is France on one side and the Republic of Ireland on the other, and Northern, and I believe it's Denmark or Norway, one of them. My geography is quite bad. Canada over there, Greenland, isn't it? Yes, Greenland, and there is a state. Yeah. Anyway, geography and me don't get on. Me and my geography teacher never got on in school. She used to say that I'll never amount to anything. Well, I'd like to have a chat with her about her feelings. However, I'm moving on slowly.
Around the world on the internet, this is Real Terrio Radio.
If we look at our neighbours, we look at Queen Elizabeth and how she dealt with it. So, in the North and the Republic of Ireland, you had the Troubles. I didn't know how much... I always thought that the Queen didn't visit Northern Ireland until 1999. How wrong I was. How wrong I was. She insisted that she should still be seen. She also met leaders from across both divides to try and bring them together in a conversation. Rather than them talking about what made them different, they were able to talk about what made them the same. And what's quite funny in this Ukraine-Russian war, both of them are very patriotic countries, and both very
Around the world on the internet, this is Real Terrio Radio.
So we were talking about. I was getting a bit confused, so I have taken a break. It's about 15 minutes later. We're talking about peace and using power. Sometimes having that power and not using that power is the greatest power. Because, as I was saying, the Queen on the books of around the world is the biggest military power, or the monarchy of the United Kingdom, or the Commonwealth. And then, this is before putting into account all of the republics. It is quite shocking that, and it's also quite understanding why a certain person sent condolences to the United Kingdom, even though he blames the United Kingdom for, like, the war in Ukraine. He has an hilarious trap, but isn't that a weird thing? Because when you draw comparisons to him, he uses his military, he uses his people as cannon fodder. He takes their rights away from them and strips them. Do you really think that Vladimir Putin is living up to the prayer of St. Francis that I read to you at the beginning of this episode? Do you really think that Vladimir Putin understands that what he is doing is wrong? Love thy neighbour. Ukraine is your neighbour. I have neighbours, you have neighbours in your house. If we put it into context, right? Now, we all have those neighbours who are classified the neighbour of hell. Or, you know, other students across the road that have a party at 3 a.m. and you're trying to get your son to sleep. And, you know, your wife tells you to go outside and sort it. We have neighbours whose children run up and down the street at 3 o'clock in the morning and all you want to do is go to sleep, but your bedroom is in the front room so you can hear all of this and they're shouting. You have neighbours who play loud music at stupid o'clock and their dogs are barking, but, you know, you're not going to cause a war with them, are you? No sane person is going to say, well, I want your territory, so we might as well go to war, and when whoever wins is going to keep your territory. Well, if you don't, I will personally campaign to your family and force them to vote me as the head of your household. And you will submit to my will. What I'm saying here is a bit like the British Empire. Now, over time, the British Empire broke up. Some places chose to keep the Queen as a unifying force, you know, not to muddy the waters of the state functionaries and the political. If you look at the Russian way, it goes back to the Tsars. It goes back to the power that the Tsar had. One person controlling the Duma. Well, the Duma wasn't the Duma. It's not. It's a political organisation like the Parliament, and it has their power. The president can overrule it. The Tsar could overrule it. These people are, yes, they are the representatives. Yes, they make the law, but in practice, they don't have as much power. You know, in the UK, where we're a constitutional monarchy. With parliamentary sovereignty. The parliament is sovereign, where the monarch is bound by parliamentary procedure to follow the law. Now, in the accession, the new king, King Charles, promised to uphold that, meaning that there's no autocracy here, although there is an institution that... See, the royal family is one of those Marmite situations. they are an institution that can be used and do some great works with charities and do bring causes to the forefront, and also they do and are unifiers. But then you have the institution of monarchy, where you see, because the crown is used to describe government, decisions taken by politicians, you have this then that gets muddied. In Spain, if you look at Spain, they restored their monarchy in the 70s after a fascist time. I somehow feel that it is almost time for Russia to restore its monarchy. Well, effectively, isn't that what they have? When the commander-in-chief of their forces, Vladimir Putin, is allowed to run roughshod over international conventions of peace, allowed to threaten this world with weapons of mass destruction, allowed to invade a neighbour. It's also a startling contrast, again, as I've said, on the books, Her Majesty the Queen or the Monarch of the Commonwealth and most of the realms in the Commonwealth, on paper, is the biggest military. If there was one Commonwealth military, it would be the biggest in the world. Even bigger than the USA. So it's an interesting comparison that over time, instead of unifying force, what most Christians believe, and bringing them together under the law of the secular world, the Queen chose to do it a different way. Not with, like, you are subservient to us, but more as, you're equal. Come, let's all get around this table, let's have a discussion, let's form a family. Very big difference, isn't it, here, than going to invade them. Now, I know this is bad, but let's forget about the history. That happened. It's not a good history. But there are parts of that history that are good. There are parts of that history that are bad. There are parts that we are still living out today. But it was more of, come around a table, have a conversation. Let's listen to each other. And let's look, let's listen and be heard. Let's digest. Let's try and get through this together. There are many institutions in the world that have said, let's do this with other nations. You have the United Nations, for one. But I believe that they become over political. Now, if you look at the Commonwealth, there is no political structure there, really, is there? Like, there is no one overlapping parliament or, that controls everything there. It's when the Queen was acting as head of the Commonwealth, as her son will now, that is the role that they're doing. They are not the British monarch, they are head of the Commonwealth in that role. So, there are different kinds of visits that are made. So you have the head of the Commonwealth visit, or you can have the royal visit from the United Kingdom. But then on top of that, you could be visiting on behalf of Australia, and so on. So, why are we talking about visits? Oh yes, so, although there is a head of the Commonwealth, and all of the Commonwealth leaders are treated as equals, and they all come and talk, and they all have their discussions around the table, and they listen to each other, and they have their disagreements, but there's no hatred between them, even though there probably historically was. But you bring them together in a heartful conversation. You don't try and force them into voting for something that they don't want at some point. You don't send your military forces because you happen to be the head of the military in to invade your neighbour because you don't like the current leadership of the country. We don't live in 1822. We live in 2022. These kind of problems even ended by 1922, in 1942, in 1952. We do not live in these times. We've moved on from sending our forces in. If you look at his military strategic plans, they're way out of whack of what he tried. He did not expect a fight back from the Ukrainian people, and for them to be so patriotic. So now we have to have a referenda. Some more divisive tactics here, right? Look how referendums have happened in the UK. Look how political leaderships have happened in the United States of changes of power. Again, I said at the beginning of this, I believe, because I have recorded this about 4 times, so I can't remember what cut I'm on. But we had 2 changes of power in the United Kingdom that happened peacefully. We had the change of political overlords, and then we had the change of the monarch. And these things happened just as they meant to happen. There was no riots. There were no riots. There was no trouble in the streets. There was just the continuance of, people moving in. The change. And September this month, and I've talked about some of that change, some of those divisive tactics and peace, and I hope that we can remember that Her Majesty the Queen was a focal point for peace and unity, rather than discord and division. So in times of change, in times of where we are right now, a month of change and transition, there are people out there who seek to divide us, and there are people out there who seek to unify us. I personally would rank the unifying part than the divisive part, because divisive tactics become hatred, hatred becomes darkness, and darkness leads us to injury, doesn't it really? Yeah, mentally or spiritually, or even physically. So I'd rather be in the light. I'd rather have love. I'd rather be a unifying force. I'd rather console than be consoled. I'd rather listen and try to understand. And I'd rather bring joy to people's lives. Now this prayer, there's another reason why I read it. Her Majesty the Queen lived like that. If you think about it, whenever she would turn up, even after the Aberfan disaster, and there's been great controversy about this, but even when she would turn up to a disaster like this, although it was a sad time for herself, for the country, for Wales, for the people of that area, and as a mother it must have been hard. The first visit was a consoling. She was there to console the people, to help them through their grief. The second visit was probably a more joyous visit, although over the time she had been back many times, and it's to console, to bring joy, and to bring light to their lives. So I feel that prayer was the right prayer to use for this, as we are talking about that. Now we're going to move on to another topic. We're going to move on for the next 15 minutes talking about the downfall of the Boris Johnson government. Something that I've wanted to do for some time. Hasn't it been an interesting couple of weeks months.
Around the world on the internet, this is Real Terrio Radio. Around the world on the internet, this is Real Terrio Radio.
I like that one, so I played it twice. But hasn't it been an interesting couple of months here in the UK? So, who would have thought that Partygate would have turned into Resignation Gate? And but it didn't, did it? It took a couple of votes, and the Queen's Diamond Jubilee, and Boris to go once and for all. Vote of no confidence. What did he achieve as Prime Minister exactly? Besides lie of getting us out of the European Union, and the lie of getting Brexit done, because Brexit is far from done. We're still negotiating on the Irish border. We have trade deals that need to be done. We're about to enter, and the man who was in charge of our economy, to remember this, he was the Prime Minister, the buck starts and stops with him. We are about to enter a cost of living crisis where his main manifesto point was levelling up. Levelling up for who? Levelling up for the rich that are already rich, or levelling up for the person who uses the food bank, the person who uses community lunching meals. Again, politics is a divisive topic, and I know after the little talk about monarchy and absolute authoritarianism, there were parts of Boris Johnson that did seem to me through his premiership that were a little bit authoritarianism. There are people out there who still believe that Boris Johnson is a very good leader and would like him to return tomorrow. Quite frankly, there are people out there who refuse to see that the reason we are in the mess we are in this country is because we have had the same government for 12 years. Now, as you know, the Conservative Party, we live in a democracy that is one evolved by party politics, divisive tactics. This is why, in the UK, if you look at the differences between the January 6th riots and what happened when Boris resigned, it's a lot different to what happened in America when they changed their power. If you look at how the power of the head of state changed when Her Majesty the Queen died, this is different, again, from what happened on January 6th. Politics and leading a country and forces and stuff should be kept well away from each other. Because when you muddy the waters, that is what happens. If you think about relationships this way, so you have a relationship. Now, you have different relationships with different people. With your mum and dad, it's more of a, they are there as your mum and dad. They, when you were growing up, were authoritative. They loved you, they guided you, but they were where you got your authorities from. So if you wanted to go out, you said, "Ma'am, can I go out?" Do you know what I mean? If you were naughty, you were punished. If you look at your girlfriend or your wife, you are in a covenant together. You are facing this life together. So they are two different relationships, right? So if you look at a friend, you're probably not as committed to your friends as you are to your wife about sharing all of your life together, even though you should be. So these are different kinds of relationships, different, distinct boundaries that we don't cross. When you muddy those boundaries and you muddy those waters, as the American Constitution or the divisive tactics of politics, and I have to say that I've found Boris Johnson's presidential style leadership to be very repulsive of the United Kingdom politics. I found it to be very divisive as well, especially during the pandemic, where he should have been working with the opposition and not worrying about his own political gains. We currently have the Conservative Party polling 10 points behind the Labour Party. We have a leader who has just come out of nowhere, who is Prime Minister. We have a group of people who have only been politicians for less than 10 years running this country. We are in a mess. And I believe it has not been helped by anyone in the senior political makeup of the United Kingdom in the past decade. In fact, I believe that we have dumbed down most of our institutions. You look at education, you speak to retired teachers, and they all say the same thing. If I was teaching today, I would be struck off. Okay, that's great. So, I always remember that I was taught, you were taught in school what history and the curriculum, but you were also taught other life lessons by your teachers, such as, for me, don't let them, grind you down. Don't let them. And this also came back from my family life too. Don't let them grind them down. Don't let people put you in a box. Fight the system. Question. Do your research. Read about it. I was talking with my old history teacher yesterday, and because I had a meeting yesterday with someone, and I wanted to let her know, because this teacher means so much to me. She taught me to fight, and she taught me to pick up battles, and she's a great lady. And I was telling her what was going on in my life, and we were talking, and I said, well, it's teachers like you who inspired me. It would have been so easy for me to say, well, yeah, I've got a disability, let's play on that. It would have been so easy. My own disability, right, does cause me some animosity. When there's stuff, like, I've got to take a day out because I've overdone it that week and I haven't rested, and my body is just like, ugh. And that causes me to have depression or anxiety. And then, like, the anxiety part is like, oh, I'm thinking of talking about me, if I said I'm going to be somewhere and stuff like that, or stuff, sometimes, even, and I believe this has now turned into a rant, because I was meant to be talking for 15 minutes about Boris Johnson, but I don't wish to give the man any airtime, so I wish to talk about myself. So we're going to move again, and you've already had, you're listening to, go on then.
Around the world on the internet, this is Real Terrio Radio.
You might as well have that as well. So we're going to change the topic to me. So life is great, and I believe that education that I had is different to the children's education today. I also believe that some things are set out to dumb down our children. I was in a conversation, we were talking with another friend of mine who has a child, and we were talking about the state of cartoons. Now, me and this friend are the same age. Me and my cousin, because my cousins have children as well, are the same age. And we all, for some reason, agree that Fireman Sam, from when we were kids, was much educational, much better than Fireman Sam today. How about Postman Pat? Did you know that Postman Pat has been privatised? Shocking. Poor Mrs. Goggins. And I can't believe I remember that. But, you know, it somehow is quite wrong that something has happened in the last 20 years to these systems. Education has changed. The standard of teaching, the standard of everything for children has just deteriorated quite drastically through organisations designed by politicians that like the national curriculum, like, you know, the funding formulas. They're not giving the schools the resources they need. So this is what happens. Too many people in the world are reliant on media, such as Sky News, BBC, or let's take it this way, GB News, Talk Radio News, and they all tell the same story just from a different divisive narrative. So I can tell you a story, and it all goes back to polling as well, because you can use polling to prove what you want. If I asked you a question about national service, or, you know, 1 minute I could get you, and this is in Yes Prime Minister as well, in a TV show, what was very great. I remember watching it, and it's done so greatly by the guy who plays Sir Humphrey Appleby, but it just shows the point. You can get someone to, in one poll data, vote for something, and in another poll data, vote against something. And the media know this, and the political parties know this, so it's easier to use divisive tactics. We're coming to an end, and the things that I think that we can take from this podcast today is that sometimes if we drop the divisive tactics, if we seek to unify as Queen Elizabeth did in her personal life, as a lady, not her as the monarch. Yes, she was the monarch and she was guided by that, but I somehow feel that certain things were done and she wished to do them to unify because they were important to her and to her faith. So if we seek to drop all of those things that divide us and we seek to pick up the love and we listen and we are on and we get there, then hopefully we become better human beings, we become better followers of our God. We become better in ourselves. Yes, there are times when life makes us so angry. And yes, there are times when you really want to scream. But, you know, scream. That's what I do. Forget about it then. Just move on. Life is a lot easier. Thank you for joining me today on this episode. Visit our Facebook page, www.facebook.com/RealTario, and I will probably see you soon. And have a great day. Bye bye.
Come to an end. But the fun doesn't have to stop here. If you have any questions, suggestions, or